Now, how do we tie all this information together that I've just given you and you're sitting there going, oh, I don't understand anything? Basically, what I want you to think about is how do you want to use, what kind of pictures do you want to take? Let's take, for example, that you're at your child's soccer game. It's in the middle of the day, it's at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun is shining bright. You want to get the whole image of all the players, your children's friends playing soccer and everything, and you want to stop the action because maybe when they go to kick, you want to stop the action of them kicking that ball. So we're going to have then a high shutter speed, because remember, a high shutter speed stops action. And let's just put here, stops action. Just to recap. I know you don't have a notebook to read as we're going, so it's real important that you understand this. And then because it is so bright out, we're also going to have probably a small aperture. Now you can set your camera on shutter speed priority. You can set it on a high shutter speed, so stop action, and then the camera will set the aperture where it needs to be. And that might be very comfortable for you starting out on this, and I would highly suggest that. So then it's probably, if it's a bright sunny day, you're going to have a real small aperture, or it's going to be like at f probably 12 to f16 is what I'm guessing. And you're probably, speed will stop, by the way, just for your information, speed will stop at 250th of a second. You'll be able to stop your children's speed very well. You can even go up to 500 of a 1/500th. I guess I should put 1 in front of that, second. And either one of those will stop the action very, very well. Same thing happens if you're photographing a car race or a bicycle race or that. Now, that gave the overall picture of everybody playing, or all the cars in the car race and everything's in focus and you're stopping the action. Now let's say that your son is out playing football and he's a running back and he's got the ball and he's running for a touchdown. He's got the ball tucked in under his arm. And you want to zero in just on him and not to have anybody else in the way. Remember we talked about depth of field. Here's where depth of field comes in and plays an important part. So if we want a high depth of field, or a low depth of field, excuse me, then we're going to go down in our shutter, not our shutter speed, but our aperture. Your aperture is going to be a little smaller. Let's say f4 or f5.6. And you're going to have that, and that's going to focus just on your child and blur the other ones out. Then you can go to aperture priority, which is A or AV in your camera, and it'll set the shutter speed. Now you may get, because you're just going in on that one thing, you may end up getting a little bit of blur of the motion. And that's a whole nother thing if you want to capture your child running horizontally across the field like this. You may get a little blur behind you. You'd have to pan the camera, and that's a little bit higher technique. Even us professionals sometimes have a little bit of difficulty with that. So we're going to show you some examples of these. In fact, if you take a look here, we've got an example of an airplane. Now, if you see this airplane, you'll notice that it's just the airplane in focus and everything else is out of focus. We wanted to hone in on that airplane and nothing else, so that our attention and our eye went right to that airplane, as you see in this image. Now, in the next image, if you'll take a look, here's the next image where we have the airplane and everything else is in focus. And then you have to, and we've stopped all the action of those airplanes going there. Maybe we have more than just one plane, and in here you'll see that there's a couple planes and everything else is in focus. So it just depends upon your application and what you want to do with these. Now, let's do this. let's go to a whole nother application. We've talked about athletics and different sporting events where there's fast-moving things. What about, do you like to take pictures of flowers in your garden? A lot of people seem to like to do that. And aperture priority and shutter speed and depth of field all play in together in this too. See how the three are all interrelated here? And it makes it difficult. So what we're going to do is erase the board here, and we're going to give you some other examples of flowers. If I'm doing close-ups of flowers, and I want to come in and really have something that, and we'll show you examples of these, but I really, oh, that's a pretty flower. And most people will look at this flower and say, wow, that is really pretty. I want to take a picture of that whole flower. So that means if there's anything sticking out on a flower, let's take it from the side, and maybe this flower looks like this from the side, and it's got a big long pistil sticking out with anthers on it. And you want to have a picture of everything from here to here in focus. How are we going to do that? That's depth of field again. So we've got to figure out what we're going to do. If we need a big depth of field, what do we have to have again? We have to have a high aperture, or a large, I guess I shouldn't say high, I should say larger aperture opening. Or, I'm sorry, I'm saying that backwards. A higher aperture number. So we're going to be like at f14, f16, maybe even f22. Whoops, f22. And that means everything from this point back to this point will be in focus. And that's fine if you want to take an overall picture or a field of flowers, or you have a pretty flower garden and you want the whole garden in focus. Now, if you'll look at this image that I have here, this shows you exactly what I'm talking about. All of the flowers, the tulips in this, are in focus. So you can see the whole thing. It still is striking to you, but they're in focus. Let's take the next example here. The next example is going to be where I want to come in and I want to see all the insides of this flower. Maybe there's some neat little designs in here, and I want to come in and just focus on this area right here. Just inside. I don't want to see all the rest of it. What am I going to do that? I want to throw everything else in here out of focus because I want your eye going right to here. And we'll talk about cropping later. That cropping can have a lot to do with it, but right now let's just talk about this. We want our eye to focus on that point where you want the person to look at that image. So then we have to do, if we're going closer or a close-up, and that takes a particular type of lens called a macro lens or a micro lens, whichever you prefer to use. Some people call it macro and some call it micro. On a close-up lens, we're going to have a short depth of field, and we're going to put depth of field. We're going to put DOF, depth of field. And we have a short depth of field. So that means we're going to set it at something like f2.8 or f3.5, whatever your lens goes down to. In other words, the smallest number on the aperture. And that will give us the shortest depth of field. And then you can set your camera on aperture priority again, let it all fall into place where the shutter speed needs to be. So that's how these interrelate. Depth of field, aperture, and shutter priority all fall together. When you want to start, what I do a lot of times is then I'll go to the setting on my camera that is M for manual. And manual means I can set not only this, but I can set this also. And I can set the shutter speed and this and get exactly where I want. Now, if you look at that, and we'll go into that in a little bit deeper on manual and how to work the manual. I think that's a lesson just in itself. But anyway, you can do that. But I think for right now, just set shutter priority or aperture priority depending upon your application. If you look at this example of this flower that I have now, you notice that just very little of it is razor tack in focus, but that's where I want your eye to go, and the rest of it just falls off very, very softly. And that's what we want to see for the short depth of field. In this application, this is exactly a wonderful way to do it.